Hello, Leah. Sorry.
Hello, Ravi. Good morning.
Good morning, and I apologize. I'm a little bit late today. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Okay. I thought I was about to text you. I thought you were not finding the link or something like that.
Okay.
Hold on, Ravi. I need to set up the other computer. Hold on. Give me a second.
Okay, fine. Good. Okay.
All right, Ravi, we are good to go.
Very good. Wonderful. Okay. Well, nice to see you again. And those who I can't see, it's nice to know that you're there. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, today we are going to speak about the Noahide Law of Justice, called Dinim, laws. And of course, as usual, I'm happy to take any other questions you have as well. But this will be the framework of our class today. Now,
all right.
the law of the law of justice. It's once again
Ravi,
yeah.
Hold on, Ravi. I have a technical things over there. Give me another 1 second and we can continue.
Fine.
I'm sorry.
Good.
Okay, Ravi. Done.
Okay.
Let's continue.
Now, Leo, are you going to translate simultaneously, or are we going to?
Yes.
How are we going to do it? Okay.
Yes,
fine.
I would like to. I will translate simultaneously using the subtitle. Down,
Okay,
so everybody.
Good. Okay,
yeah.
Fine. But I'll pause after every so often after each section, so that there can be questions. Okay. Does that sound right to you, or would you like me to go straight through? What's best?
No problem, Ravi. You can stop. Just check whether the audience has
that's
the.
Fine. Okay, that's good.
All right.
All right. Now, the Noahide Law of Justice has several aspects, and it deals. If you look at Maimonides, who is the great codifier, he says that the function of the courts, which is one to have courts, is one of the Noahide laws, and its job is to judge the conduct of the other 6 Noahide laws. In other words, we have altogether 7 Noahide laws. One of them is the law of courts. That court is to make sure that the society is running according to is running according to the other Noahide laws, and to judge the breach or the transgression of those other laws, and to make sure that those other laws are actually carried out. Now, so this view also says that that the task, therefore, is to set up courts, and also that the system of justice should be one which actually encourages and brings the people to fulfill the other laws. So that, in a way, justice symbolizes the state. There is an obligation on the court. And the court, of course, there are various branches of government, as we all know. There is the parliament, there is the courts, and there is the executive. There is the prime minister or the president, whatever it might be. Still, the courts are in a way the central aspect of the state, and they are there in order to not just to judge the transgressions against this, but also to make sure that people know the laws and keep the laws. Now, I mentioned briefly that, that there can be about the idea of different branches of law. Now, in Noahide law, there is no abstract requirement that the judiciary, the courts, be separate from the other branches of government. As we find, for example, in America, it can be, and maybe it's ideal that it should be. But we find historically that there were great leaders such as King Solomon, King David, who were not only were they the leaders, not only were they the head of the state, but they were also judges. So it's not excluded that there could be the functions could coalesce. But of course, needless to say, the justice has to be something which is objective and true. We cannot allow corruption. God forbid. Corruption is the negation of justice. And so even if a king, let us say, were also a judge, the standard of objectivity would have to be applied to him too. And we have to find ways to make sure that the king does not abuse abuse justice. The justice is not corrupted. Now, there's also a very interesting. That's one view. Then there is also a concept in Noahide law, a separate opinion, if you like. You hear me referring many times to what I call the second opinion. The second opinion goes right throughout all of the Noahide laws, and it represents, in some ways, a more rigorous set of requirements. And this second view of the law of justice says that justice is not just about the judging of people, about courts, but the justice also refers to what is called a whole area of civil and procedural law. In other words, it relates in our context here also to the procedures of justice, which it says are like the Jewish ones too, in many ways. And we can talk a little about that. Maimonides, who says that the procedures don't have to be like the Jewish ones. They can be they can be procedures which, so long as they're consistent and fair procedures, they can be different procedures which are worked out by different societies, different styles of justice. But the second view says that the Noahide law has to take a number of rigorous stances in procedure which resemble Jewish law also. Jewish law is very rigorous, very stringent in its standards of justice. Okay, so, but as I say, that's not, this second view is one to which society can advance, but it's not the baseline. Now, there is also a very interesting distinction between these two views of justice. That is to say, between the view that justice is there just to enforce order and fulfillment of the mitzvahs, or whether it is also a set of abstract procedures. Now, one view says, and this is a very practical view, it says that justice requires, Noahide law of justice requires individuals to take personal responsibility for justice in society. Now, I don't know if you remember the story of Shem in the Bible, that there was a prince, a non-Jewish prince, who captured Dinah. Dinah was a daughter of Jacob, of Yaakov. Now, one second. Now, Dinah, what happened then was that the two of the sons of Jacob punished the whole city of Shem because they did not bring their prince to justice. Their prince had abducted Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and afflicted her. The people of Shem saw it happening, but they did not do anything about it. They did not bring their prince to justice. Now, this is the view of Maimonides. Maimonides says, and this is the baseline view, that individuals are even when society breaks down to the extent that a prince or a leader of the state transgresses, and if you like, this means the whole state is falling apart when the government, when figures of government begin to abuse power and act wrongly and transgress the Noahide laws. Maimonides says the individuals must take action. Individuals must intervene, and they must, even if need be, do this very difficult task of bringing their own prince to justice. Now, that is one view. Another view, that of Nachmanides, is that when that happens, when the society breaks down to that extent, that government has become lawless, justice can't function, because justice only works when we have properly functioning courts. It is like if there is breakdown of the social order, then justice is order. You can't carry out justice. Justice requires procedure, courts, and so on and so forth. So these are two very important. These are two views of the commandment of justice. Is justice always there, even in the jungle? In other words, that individuals are obligated to restore social order and to bring about justice, if need be, by themselves? Or do we say that justice actually pertains to an abstract functioning system? When government is running properly, courts are running properly, then you have justice, and there's no other way to have justice. So that's an important distinction. But I think we cannot avoid the baseline position, and that tells us a very important thing. It tells us that there is a level in society, there is a level of individual responsibility, and even though it may be extremely hard for individuals to restore order and justice when justice has broken down, nevertheless, there is an obligation to try to do so. Now, where do we see that? We see it where do we see that society breaks down completely? God forbid. It could be in a situation where there is looting and rioting, and there's the state itself is not working. The police are not working. The courts are not working. So individuals then have to step in and stop people from stealing, stop people from killing, and if need be, they have to act as judges themselves and take the extreme measures of if need be, taking armed force against such individuals. But obviously, this is an extreme situation, and we would much prefer, obviously, to have court system working where it proceeds in an orderly form with procedures and witnesses and trials and so on and so forth. So these are two basic views. Leo, is that reasonably clear? Or
yes,
good. Okay.
So far.
All right. So good. Now, so I suppose that for most of us, we have courts of justice. Now, and we're not in that extreme situation of social breakdown. So maybe it's just that's something of an abstraction, but the practical lesson from that is that we have to be, in a way, judges in our own families, in our own communities, which means if we see wrong happening, we have to stop it. We have to try to stop it. We have to do whatever we can to if we see if a person is stealing, and you have a colleague who steals, and you know that this person steals, you must do something to stop it. If you see a person who is performing other transgressions of the Noahide laws, who heaven forbid is involved in some sort of physical harm or even killing of other people, we must do something to stop it. In other words, this idea of personal responsibility extends and involves the individual. And I would like to take this even further. And I would like to say that what it means in an even broader sense is that we have to be responsible in our responsible persons. There is a concept of, there is an important value in responsibility. Now, it may seem somewhat far-fetched, but I believe that this extends also to the notion that drugs should not be permitted. That is to say, in Indonesia, probably this is not even an issue, but in the West, there are moves to legalize marijuana and various other mind-altering substances. Now, what this does, in my view, this is something which diminishes responsibility and objectivity and clarity. And this is, therefore, this is a reason every human being has, at some sense, to be a judge for himself or herself, a judge for one's family, a judge for one's fellows, in the sense that one is there to review and examine our conduct and the conduct of our fellows, obviously in a way which is pleasant. We have to do this in a tactful way sometimes, just to make sure that we are reviewing and judging our own conduct properly and the conduct of those around us to the extent that we can influence them to live a moral life. So that's a broad, general sense of the concept of responsibility, which is built in to the idea of justice. It's not just courts. Justice is an attitude. Justice is a stance towards our situation, and this is something which we have to. This is something which we have to do. Now, so then we come to this leads into this comes into very abstract concepts, but very important concepts. Now, here in the Noahide law, there is a notion that there is and we'll speak about this a bit later. There's a whole idea of there can be punishment for transgression of the Noahide laws, and it can even be, I'll discuss this more later, it can even go as high as capital punishment. Now, I follow the view of a number of writers who say that capital punishment is not mandatory. It can be applied to transgression of the Noahide laws, but it does not have to be. Only in an extreme case where there is such lawlessness that we need the deterrent of capital punishment, do you invoke it? But if society can function without capital punishment, then it does not have to employ it. But we see that punishment is something which can be a very severe matter, and for that reason, this fact impacts also upon the different relationships between men and women in the commandment of justice. Amongst the Noahide laws, we generally speaking find no distinction between men and women. However, when we come to the Noahide law of justice, there is a distinction between men and women. And this is a very important thing to discuss, Because one of the big themes, I don't know if this, to what extent people talk about this in Indonesia, but there is a whole movement of feminism, which is all over the Western world, is something which would probably oppose this distinction. But it's based on a misunderstanding. Now, as we mentioned before, the Noahide laws require, according to Maimonides, the Noahide law of justice requires a person not only to judge another, but also to stop transgression, to stop a transgression. Now, stopping a transgression may require physical force. And that physical force is something which women may not have in the same degree as men have. We're talking here about literally, physically stopping a person from transgressing. And for this reason, this is one of the reasons why the obligation to enforce justice was placed on men and not on women in Noahide law. And that's why in the case of Shem, when the prince of Shem abducted Dinah, and the other sons of Jacob punished the people of Shem, they punished only the men. They did not punish the women, because it was the men who had the physical resource, the physical strength, let us say, and as competence to actually bring that prince to justice. It was not something which was expected of the women. That's one thing. There's another aspect, there's another important distinction between men and women when it comes to justice. Now here is that you have to remember here that we're talking about what justice can be a very severe matter. Justice can involve taking the life sometimes of a criminal, and to take the life of a human.
Rabbi, sorry, you were on mute. I don't know what happened. Maybe I pressed something.
Is everything okay now? You can hear me again. Yeah.
Oh, now I can. Sorry, continue.
I have to be careful. Maybe I'm wondering, this is a sign that I should be muted now. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, this is a delicate matter. Anyway, but so there's a very important, we have to understand a very important distinction between men and women. Each has a strength which the other does not have. For example, when it comes to the family, the woman is understood to be the force which is who is able to unify the family. As a matter of fact, also we see, as I mentioned before, I mentioned on an earlier occasion, that according to the strict letter of Noahide law, it is relationships are determined through the mother. In other words, if you're a brother and sister, then that's because you're a brother and sister because you have a common mother, not necessarily because you have a common father. But that, even though Noahide law has taken on the idea that a father, the children of a common father, even though there were different mothers, are also brother and sister, nevertheless, the baseline notion is that it comes from the mother. The mother is the foundation of the home. And that is because she has a unique, nurturing, unifying factor. When I say the foundation of the home, I don't mean that she's the sole authority in the home, but what I mean is she's the one who welds the family as a unit. That is the feminine strength to unify, to harmonize, to bring together, to hold together a family. The man, on the other hand, is a more abstract, more removed person. The father there may be exceptions to this. The father doesn't have the same, even though the father loves his children, the father doesn't have the same closeness to the family, to the children, as the mother does. It's a different. The male is more remote, the female is closer, and both are very important. Because the male, by being somewhat remote, the male also represents, if you like, the concept of the authority of law and principle. And the mother is the one who is more flexible, more empathetic, and is able to hold the family as a unit. Now, we find similarly what we find, and therefore what characterizes the woman in a positive sense is this quality of subjectivity, closeness, feeling, empathy. And what characterizes the man more is this quality of distance, remoteness, objectivity. Now, what do we find also in wartime, for example? Who goes to war? Well, the reality is that sometimes women do too, but the principal combatants in war are men, not women. And there's a reason for this. Because since men have that more dispassionate character, more dispassionate nature, less emotional, less empathetic nature, therefore they are able to stand and tolerate the terrible stress of war and fighting more than a woman is. That doesn't make a man better, not better, but it's a different capacity. The woman is the one who is better, who welds the family, and that's why she is given custody of young children. Young children are custody, and not men, generally speaking. They have different powers and different strengths. Now, when it comes to justice, and when it comes to judging a person, and when it comes to judging whether a person shall be punished with his life or not, here we must call on a male characteristic of dispassionate, of objectivity and dispassionateness. In other words, removal from empathy, removal from feeling, removal from emotion, and the ability to assess the facts objectively. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying women are not objective and women have tremendous intelligence. It's not, one is not more intelligent than the other. That's not it, but it's a quality of objectivity and dispassionateness, as distinct from the idea of closeness and empathy and feeling. So therefore, that is why in the Noahide Law of Justice, we have the principle that judges, when it comes in particularly when the matter of judgment involves taking the life of a human being, punishing a person with their life, in that extreme case, that the judge is a male and not a female, and that the witness who can bring and that the witness who testifies to the facts which might determine whether or not a person is going to be executed or not will be a male, not a female, because of that factor of objectivity which is required to make sure that a life is not taken wrongly. So, but having said that, we do have female judges. Now, why and where could there be female judges or female witnesses in justice? There is a place for it. That will be in a situation where, in monetary matters, the parties to a conflict agree to accept a female judge or agree to accept female witnesses. Because in monetary matters, you can make your own conditions. Similarly, we could say that where there is no capital punishment involved, there too, you can have female judges and female witnesses will play a role. It is only in the limiting situation where a person's life could be taken, where a person could be executed, a very rare case where a person's life could be executed, that Noahide justice says that this can only be done by a male judge and on the testimony of a male witness. Because since the taking of the life of this person is such a serious matter, we are going to seek that quality of objectivity and dispassionateness, which is required in such a case. Now, I know I've touched here a topic which could be very controversial, and I'm not here, but this is a very special situation where we understand why God made men and women as distinct people with separate strengths and separate qualities. And this gives, it's very important to know this, because this actually removes a tremendous confusion in the world today, particularly in the Western world, where there is this idea that men and women need to be identical. It has nothing to do with equality. It has to do with the concept of recognizing the distinct strength of a woman and the distinct strength of a man. And when we lose this perspective, then by insisting that a woman have to be the same as men in all this. I'm not speaking about equal wages. That's all fine. I'm not arguing it. I'm not talking about equal pay. That's equal pay, of course, equal pay. But what I'm saying is that this is a commandment in which we see how men and women are different, and each has an independent strength. And this is a very important. This is something which we can't avoid talking about this matter, because there's tremendous confusion in the world today about it. So, in a nutshell, the Noahide Law of Justice says that where a capital punishment is at stake, it can only be judged by a man and by a man's testimony. However, in other areas, if it's financial matters or matters which don't require the taking of life, then if the parties accept to have female judges and female witnesses, then it is permissible to do so. So maybe we pause at this point, Leo, and see if there's any discussion or questions. Is that all right?
Okay, yeah, sure. Bapak Ibu saudara sekalian, tadi sesuai dengan penjelasan dari Rabi terkait dengan hukum, terkait dengan keadilan, ya, terkait dengan bagaimana kita harus menjalankan keadilan dan sistem peradilan, hakim wanita, hakim pria, segala macam sesuai dengan kapasitas dan sesuai dengan uniqueness-nya, ya, kekuatannya. Apakah ada pertanyaan Bapak Ibu saudara sekalian untuk ditanyakan? Silakan, nanti saya akan terjemahkan buat Rabi. Oke, silakan. Kalau ada yang mau bertanya, silakan unmute lalu ditanyakan. Apakah ada? Segera Bapak Ibu saudara sekalian. Nggak kedengeran?
If not, I can continue. Okay, how's the translation working? Are people understanding as it goes simultaneous? Is it working all right, Leah?
Yeah, it's working all right. The text is basically there, definitely, Rabbi.
Okay, fine.
It's working fine.
All right, good. Okay.
I don't know why there's no response here. Let me ask them one more time. Bapak Ibu saudara sekalian, ada yang mau ditanyakan? Silakan. Atau cukup?
Halo, shalom.
Cukup, More.
Shalom, ada pertanyaan.
Oh ya, silakan.
Apakah karet itu berlaku bagi Bani Israel atau bagi semua bangsa?
Oke, hukuman karet.
Ya.
Okay, Rabbi, there's a question over here.
Karet.
Ya, silakan.
36 karet.
Okay. Rabbi, there's a question. In Jewish law, we do understand that there is a punishment, a divine punishment by the name of karet or karesh. Is that also apply for Bnei Noah or only for Bnei Israel, and how it works? Maybe close in a short.
There is no punishment of karet in Noahide law. This is it's only in Jewish law. So as I say before, in Noahide law, there is theoretically there could be capital punishment theoretically for a severe transgression, but we see that a society does not have to apply that. It can use lesser physical punishments normally there could be lesser physical punishments altogether. And I think that that's probably an area of discretion. In other words, the society could decide what those punishments are, but there's no concept of karet in Noahide law. This is anyway.
All right.
But it is important to know also that a very interesting. I would like to make the point here that we spoke about earlier about the concept of Teshuva of repentance. Now, repentance is something which, of course, is very important from the standpoint of God, that the human being should regret their deeds. A human being, and how God will treat the human being is very much dependent also on the repentance, the teshuva of the individual. However, the court cannot base itself on the teshuva of a human being, because we have a principle that only God can see the heart of the human being. Only God can know what's going on inside a human being, if a human being is repenting or not. Generally speaking, judges cannot see the heart. They cannot see the repentance. So the courts have to judge on the basis of what they see and the basis of the evidence which comes before them, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, a human being is able to, in terms of, you understand, there's reward and punishment in this world and the reward and punishment in the next world. So it could be, though, that a person had to be punished in this world for doing something which was wrong. But in the next world, it could be that the person's teshuva, the repentance which the person did, removes the punishment from him. In other words, a person can purify him or herself from any form of punishment in the next world through repentance. But the courts, they can't see the heart, so they have to act on what they see or what comes before. Okay. Now, so we're going to look now at some further qualities, aspects of justice. Now, so and once again, there are different, as I mentioned before, there are several opinions upon this, on how stringent the condition should be. Well, now let's look at, first of all, is there an obligation to testify? If a person saw something if a person saw a wrongdoing, should a person report it to the police and say, I saw a wrongdoing? Is there or can a person simply say, it's none of my business, I'm not involved, nobody called me, the court hasn't asked me to come, so I'm not going to be involved? Well, it would seem that there is an obligation on an individual to come forward with evidence which they have. If we see wrongdoing, we have to set in motion the process of justice. We have to come forward and offer our testimony. Just like we said before, that we just like we have to raise our children to do the right thing, we have to try to influence our colleagues and our fellow workers and our members of our community to do the right thing. So it is when we see a violation of Noahide law, we have to do. Now, by the way, let me say, what I have been saying throughout is Noahide law. But what about other laws which are not necessarily Noahide laws? You see, maybe I should have made this point at the outset. We have two kinds of law. We have the Noahide laws, Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. These must be kept. But what about all the other laws which a society makes? For example, every country will have a law concerning what side of the road you're supposed to drive on. I don't know what side of the road people drive on in Indonesia. In Australia, it's on the left-hand side of the road. In America, it's on the right-hand side of the road. Now, that is called a positive law. That is a law which the Noahide, which society makes, legislates for its own order. Now, these laws, so long as these laws don't transgress the Noahide laws, these are called positive laws. These laws also have to be carried out. And the Noahide Law of Justice requires also that these laws be observed. So it's not just when we see that a person who has broken one of the Noahide laws, killing, stealing, and so on and so forth, but it can also be that when we see that a person is violating other positive laws of the society, traffic laws, or other administrative laws, etc. This is also something which comes under the framework of justice, because a society is allowed to make up its own rules for its own social order and organization. This is a power of the government which the Torah recognizes. In Australia right now, we are having, not in Australia, but in Victoria. I live in a state of Australia called Victoria. We are having a lockdown now, a lockdown because of the virus, even though we've got only a few cases, not many. But the government said it wanted to have a lockdown to get rid of the virus. All right, we have to follow that rule. The government is allowed to make rules. It's nothing to do with the Noahide laws, even though it means we can't go to the synagogue to pray and so on and so forth. That is that we recognize that the state has the right to make laws to protect people and their property and their health. So that is a right, and these are called positive laws. So these laws also have to be upheld, and we have to uphold them also. And the Noahide law says that all the administrative arrangements of the state have to be kept, so long, of course, they don't conflict with Noahide law. But anyway, so then we have there is also a prohibition, and we're not allowed to clearly, we're not allowed to give false testimony, and this is obviously clear. So there's an obligation to testify where we have evidence, even if we're not called. There's an obligation to testify truthfully. Now, how many witnesses are required? So in Noahide law, just one witness is enough, even for the most severe of crimes. In Jewish law, you must have two at minimum. But that was a decree of scripture. That is a Jewish requirement, and it's not required in Noahide law. Obviously, the more witnesses you have, the better, because you have a better. And now, what about the qualifications of the witness? What happens if a witness, for example, is himself a thief or has a criminal record, or so on and so forth? So the answer, it would appear that we will accept the testimony of people who are basically careful in matters of theft, and they're not killers, they're not thieves, they're not liars, and so on and so forth. This is a basic requirement. Obviously, there has to be, a question of whether you can accept a child's witness. You can't accept the testimony of a child, because that child is not a responsible person. Then, what about the whole idea of cross-examination of witnesses? Now, here there are different standards involved. According to the basic view, that it need be a person where there's been a breakdown in justice, and an individual sees this breakdown of justice, that person can even be a witness and a judge, and act on the spot. Well, clearly there you don't have any examination of the witnesses. That person's just acted. But according to the higher view of Noahide law, the more stringent view, you should obviously, there should be a cross-examination of witnesses. There's no question about that. And that is obviously preferable. Now, what about the witnesses themselves? Can the witness be a relative? The answer in Noahide law is yes. Jewish law, no. But still to be a relative, that's not a problem. It's a problem if the judge is a relative, but it's not a problem if the witness is a relative. Can a person incriminate himself? Can a person be punished when he or she gives testimony about their own guilt? What about self-incrimination? So there is there is a dispute about this, but according to one view, that a person can be punished on the basis of their own self-incriminating testimony. Others want to say no, but at all events, so there are different views. And I think probably nowadays, to a certain extent, certain Western societies don't allow a person to self-incriminate. They won't punish a person on the basis of their incrimination, but could be that the baseline of Noahide law allows that too. Now, what about also the number of judges and the qualifications of judges? Now, and the conduct of judges. Now, here we have a number of interesting things. Leo, would you like me to take a pause here, or shall I keep on going?
Go ahead, Rabbi, no problem. One more topic that should be fine about the number of the judges.
Okay, that's fine. All right, now, how in Noahide law, one judge is sufficient to hand out even the most severe judgment, severe punishment. Obviously, the more judges you have, the better. For the simple reason that you have more judges, you have more perspectives. You're more likely to discover discover innocence, and or you'll get a more objective, multifaceted view of the whole case. Still, there are the basic requirement: one judge is sufficient. Now, what about the qualifications of the judge himself? Now, obviously a judge, this is actually a very important topic today, in the West particularly. First and foremost, a judge has to be a person who knows the Noahide laws. What kind of a judge is it who himself has questionable principles? And yet we find in the West, and I don't know, maybe you find also in other countries, I don't know if this happens in Indonesia, you find judges whose personal values are bad values. I mean, look at the whole struggle about the Supreme Court in America. We have it also around the world. Does this judge believe that life is sacred, or does it not believe that life is sacred? Does the judge how does the judge understand the nature of marriage? What are his values? So it's obviously the very first thing is that a judge has to know that there is a God, and that God gave the basic laws to humanity, gave the Noahide laws. This is one. Now and it sounds like a very obvious thing, but it's not obvious at all. Unfortunately, we find many judges who don't acknowledge that there is the Creator who gave laws to humanity, and these have to be in the background, constant background of the judge's mind when he is assessing situations. He's not allowed. The judge is never allowed to rule against the Noahide laws. This is out of the question. So and of course, then there are issues of the objectivity of a judge. Now, here, for example, we find that bribery is clearly forbidden. Bribery, and for a judge to take a bribe is a very serious matter, because what it does is it destroys the objectivity. A judge has to keep the law, but it has to be objective and obsessive. in assessing it. And bribery is something which destroys justice because it removes objectivity. Now, what about a judge who is a relative or a friend of one of the litigants in front before? Well, there's a whole discussion of this, but it seems to be rational that one should avoid such a situation. The judge should not have any factors which tend to bring him into favor one litigant against another. And one of the most important things, and this is a very big issue, is that when a judge has before him litigants, different parties, and these two parties are having a dispute, he has to do everything he can to give equality to those two litigants. Now, unfortunately, we find in the West, and maybe this is the case also in Indonesia, that justice is expensive. But to enter upon a court case, you have to have a lot of money, because there are court costs. Apart from paying a lawyer, there are costs of the court, and then as you appeal to higher courts and so on and so forth. Now, what this does is this means that the justice becomes very hard for a person who is poor, or does not have the wealth of the other party. In other words, we have to make sure that there are no factors which are making it harder for one of the sides to present their case and to argue their case. There has to be parity, equality between the contestants, between the litigants over here. So that and then we come to another issue as follows: is that we have to know what the standard of proof is. How rigorous is the standard of proof? Now, we know that there is something called, which is called circumstantial evidence. Evidence which was not seen, nobody saw it, but it is inferred. We assume that something happened. Because there was a fight going on, you saw somebody go into a house, and they left the house and come into the house, the person's dead. Well, that would lead me to assume that the person who went into the house is the person who killed him. But nobody saw it happen. That's called circumstantial evidence. That's not allowed in Jewish criminal justice. It is allowed in Noahide justice, but obviously we want to do everything we can to make sure that the testimony and the procedures of justice are stringent and objective, because we're dealing here with the life and the body, so to speak, of a person. To punish a person is a very serious matter. If it has to be done, it has to be done. But it has to be done under conditions of maximum objectivity and the highest standard of proof that we can arrange. Even though, as I said before, in times of social breakdown, we do not require a high standard of proof. But nevertheless, it has to be as much objectivity as possible. All right, now then what about this situation here? Can a person claim that that I'm ignorant of the law? I didn't know the law. Is this an excuse? Is that an excuse? So the answer is very often in very basic way, it's not an excuse. But unfortunately today, what can we do? That we are raised in, particularly in the West, raised in societies where unfortunately they're raised to see nothing wrong with abortion, to see nothing wrong with forbidden sexual relationships. How can we blame people who grow up like this without knowing better if they themselves transgress the Noahide laws? This is a very difficult question. Very difficult indeed. At all events, what we do have to make sure is that we do everything that we can to make known what the Noahide laws are. We must teach them, and we must publicize them. And by doing this, this itself is part of the precept of justice. Justice is not just to judge a person, but to make sure that people don't transgress. and in the first place. And the way that happens is by teaching and spreading the knowledge of the Noahide laws in society as a whole. Well, Leo, I think I've run out time now, and maybe we could have a quick question or two, if you like, on anything that anybody would like to ask.
Okay, Rabbi, maybe there's one question here. How about if we are forced to give a false witness, and if we object, or if we do not do that, then our life will be threatened, something like that. What should we do in that kind of situation?
Well, the situation there is here's the point. You're saying, if I understand you correctly, you're saying a person, if your life is threatened unless you give false testimony, what should you do?
Yeah.
Now, the question here is, will your testimony cause another person to be killed? Will this false testimony cause another person to be killed? That is the question. Now, the thing here is that in Noahide law, if one's life is threatened, if a person is told, transgress or we will kill you, steal or we will kill you, even idolatry or we will kill you, then in Noahide law you are allowed to transgress rather than be killed. But there is one exception, and the exception is that where a person is told, kill or we will kill you, then you must say no. Then you must allow yourself to be killed. God, heaven forbid. The only thing where we may, and mind you, this has to be a situation where your life is literally at threat. We're talking about that. The only case where you can give in to that threat and transgress is where it does not involve, the only case where you can't give in to that threat is where your testimony or your action will lead to the killing of another person, an innocent person. That's when you can't.
Okay. All right, Rabbi. Wonderful. So it's really clear. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're short of time and you need to leave right now. So thank you so much, Rabbi, for today. And definitely very, very enriching and very powerful. So we meet again next week then.
Very good.
Next week morning. All right.
Okay. Well, nice to see you all, and be well.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye. All the best.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Cowen. Baraba.
Oke, baik. Terima kasih teman-teman semua yang mengikuti via Zoom maupun juga yang online di Facebook dan di YouTube Noahide Indonesia. Terima kasih. Semoga bisa menjadi tambahan informasi dan lebih membuat kita memahami tentang pentingnya 7 hukum dan pentingnya menegakkan keadilan. Jadi sekali lagi, keadilan itu bukan hanya bicara mengenai penghakiman atau apapun pengadilan gitu ya. Memang secara ada 2 aspek. Ini saya ulang sedikit. Ada 2 aspek memang. Aspek yang pertama, secara masyarakat itu wajib menegakkan keadilan, membuat produk hukum, membuat pengadilan, menetapkan hakim, menetapkan kriterianya segala macam. Dan tadi Rabbi berkata bahwa seorang hakim itu seharusnya adalah dia mengetahui 7 hukum. Karena seorang hakim tidak boleh memutuskan apapun yang bertolak belakang dengan 7 hukum. Itu yang penting. Nah, kalau misalkan terjadi bagaimana, itu urusan dia dengan Tuhan, gitu kan? Nah, tapi bagi kehidupan kita setiap hari, penting bagi kita juga untuk menegakkan keadilan. Ya, artinya kita jangan menutup mata. Tadi Rabbi juga menjelaskan, kita tidak boleh menutup mata jika ada hal yang tidak baik terjadi di sekeliling kita, ada orang yang mungkin melanggar atau mungkin hidup tidak sesuai dengan 7 hukum. Yang penting adalah buat kita tegur dia. Kalau kita tahu orangnya, kalau kita memang dia itu adalah teman kita, tegur dengan baik-baik. Itu nggak baik loh. Hal itu tuh nggak benar loh. Jangan yang dilakukan tuh jangan kita diem terus kita ngomongnya ke orang lain. Misalkan saya punya teman si A melakukan hal yang nggak beres gitu kan dalam kehidupannya. Saya diam aja karena saya pikir aduh nanti dia tersinggung apa segala macam. Tapi justru saya ngomong kepada temannya saya yang lain si B gitu, karena itu nggak boleh, itu adalah lashon hara, nggak boleh Bapak Ibu sekalian. Yang perlu dilakukan di sini adalah kita tegur A baik-baik. Nah, masalah si A mau terima atau kagak, yaitu urusan dia, gitu kan. Yang jelas kita, di mana itu terjadi di depan mata kepala kita, di depan hidung kita memiliki kewajiban seperti tadi dijelaskan oleh Rabi untuk menegakkan 7 hukum Nuh, untuk memberikan juga pengertian kepada orang yang belum mengerti mungkin terkait 7 hukum Nuh. Nah, itulah makanya salah satu alasan mengapa sesi dengan Rabi Shimon Cowen ini terkait dengan detail 7 hukum Nuh saya buat, dan kita semua juga setuju dalam komunitas Noah, kita buat untuk umum, kita buka. Agar apa? Agar makin banyak yang bisa dengar, agar makin banyak yang bisa tahu langsung dari rabinya sendiri, dan ini bukan orang sembarangan gitu kan. Jadi benar-benar kita di Noah Indonesia, komunitas ini kita ingin juga masyarakat Indonesia benar, memang saat ini kita sudah memiliki hukum, produk hukum, tetapi akan lebih baik lagi jika hukum tersebut disetarakan dan diselaraskan dengan 7 hukum. Ya, jadi ingat Bapak Ibu sekalian, kita punya kewajiban secara pribadi, jangan menutup mata terhadap sekeliling, jangan berkata yang penting saya nggak keganggu, no. Karena tadi Rabi berkata ada satu hal yang penting lagi, jika seorang individu tidak melakukan kewajibannya, semua orang itu katakanlah di sebuah masyarakat, di sebuah komunitas, di sebuah bangsa juga tidak peduli terhadap keadilan, tidak peduli terhadap justice ya Bapak Ibu sekalian. Maka kalau semua orang berkata seperti itu, tidak peduli, yang terjadi adalah sistem sistem keadilan dari suatu masyarakat itu akan runtuh, akan kolaps. Nah, ketika sistem masyarakat itu akan runtuh dan akan kolaps, yang terjadi adalah apa? Hukum rimba. Dan itu pasti akan berdampak kepada kita akan dengan lebih parah. Ya kan? Kita sudah mengalami hal tersebut, bangsa ini sudah mengalami hal tersebut. 1998 kita tahu apa yang terjadi, saya nggak perlu sebut, saya nggak perlu jelaskan, saya nggak perlu ulang. Amit-amit jangan sampai terjadi lagi. Dan itulah makanya Bapak Ibu sekalian, kita harus benar-benar mengambil bagian kita, jangan menutup mata terhadap sekeliling. Usahakan keadilan, peringati, beri pengertian, ya mudah-mudahan bisa berdampak gitu ya. Dan saya yakin kalau kita menjalankannya dengan niat yang tulus, menjalankannya dengan hati yang bersih, saya yakin Tuhan akan melihat itu, dan itu akan dianggap sebagai upah buat kita, dan Tuhan juga pasti akan melihat keseluruhan dan akan menilai keseluruhan bangsa ini masih akan terus ada di dalam sebuah keadilan dan ada dalam perlindungan. Oke? Baik.
Oke, terima kasih Rabi Leo.
Saya bukan Rabi Pak, jangan disebut Rabi, nggak mau saya.
Yo Mas Leo, thank you.
Ya, mendingan sebut Mas saja. Ya, siap, baik. Terima kasih atas waktu dan perhatiannya. Sampai jumpa lagi di waktu yang akan datang. Saudara Pak, lain rawat.
Saudara Pak.
Juga. Ya.